Each of the figures I make, I feel like are a part of folk blood water babies. And I'll just break the name down. Like you have folk from folk stories, or folk from people, or like the notion like your family's folks, your friends are folks. It can also be like through the spoken traditions, folk stories and things like that. Like it all deals with this inheritance, this cultural inheritance that we collect. Then you have blood, which is directly related to inheritance, you know? And so you have folk blood, and then you have water, which, you know, me being from St. Louis, the Mississippi River has played an extremely symbolic role in my development, just how I see things. And also just looking at how water, as far as within folk story, water is always either played the boundaries between worlds, and even in baptism, water is a cleansing element. And so like water's always played this really symbolic role within folk stories about transformation, about boundaries or the borders between, you know, two separate worlds that can be transgressed via water or through some type of water ritual. And then you have babies, because babies are basically, like within the notion of half signifiers, babies are spirits that have newly entered into this world. They exist, in my eye, between the spirit world and the human world. They're not fully brought into this particular reality, you know, at that point in time. So you have folk blood water babies. I realized I had a talent early on. I always just wanted to be like my older brother, and like we were in an after-school program, and he would always draw airplanes with his older friend Keelan, and they would never let me draw with them, you know, trying to be like, you know, the tag along or whatnot, whatever. So I decided to draw airplanes on my own, and probably about 2 months I got better than William and Keelan. And so from that standpoint, that kind of gave me that boost to be like, oh, I can draw, you know? And I think when I hit 13, no, actually when I went up, it's funny because I learned graffiti from a Filipino cat named Rob in Ohio, of all places. I was living with my grandparents at the time, and we would go to Antioch Theater, which is in Yellow Springs, Ohio, after school, and he would just show me, he would teach me a lot as far as like letters, can control, and things like that. And that's where I picked up the love of graffiti in rural Ohio, out of all places. So culture and like the love of culture can be found anywhere. And I guess like 16, 17, I was just really into graffiti. And that's when, about 16, 17 is when I devoted my life to saying, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to put my energy into, you know, and really like make it my life's work. So after high school, I got an art scholarship out to Columbia College in Columbia, Missouri. And that's when I got exposed to other types of art, other types of painting, different types of ways to approach things, and that turned me out too. I would see something like Patormo and Goya and Rembrandt, and it just basically flipped my mind as far as like what they were doing and how they expressed the world that they saw, and like the sensitivity that existed within the marks they made. And I wanted to touch that, to hold that, to understand what they were doing, and basically internalize that and move it through me and let it become a part of me in the same manner as that graffiti that we just talked about, how that became a part of me in the same manner. And it showed me how these histories relate to me, and showed me also that I have a legitimate claim to use these histories and to use these forms for my own purpose. And that started like me doing, like basically like really falling in love with Rembrandt and wanting to do portraits in that same fashion, to capture like the sensitivity to light and like the molding that he would use. He would use light to actually like mold the object as opposed to using paint. So I've just kind of fashioned my outlook around those ideas. The cop sucking the dog's dick circa 1965. You know, like in our society, especially like patriarchal society, there's always this link between sex and violence and power. And so just to mess around with like the notions of like images embedded into our social consciousness, I was just thinking, well, okay, you have sex and you have power, and you have like all these are bundled up into the notions of 1965. And as far as like how cops with dogs use those dogs to assert their power. So I just thought, okay, would it be so far-fetched to actually think about a cop and a dog like within this weird kind of sexual relationship? And the reason why I create these type of characters is because it gives me the elasticity, the ability to stretch, play, and manipulate with history. It's really interesting, like the ideas of you always being in contact at some point, or being able to be contacted by spirits at some point in time, is really prevalent within my upbringing. I remember, like, you know, talking to my grandmother about hearing voices as kids, and she would be like, oh, that's the devil calling you, don't talk to it. You know what I'm saying? So there's always this constant threat of being confronted by the spirit world, in as far as like how I grew up. I think that type of upbringing just really made me it's interesting now, because it's like, oh wow, I can see what they're talking about. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can see what they mean by saying that. You know what I'm saying? As far as like the past is always calling for the present generation to do something.